Okay, so hello, Adrian.
You're recorded, guys. We are reported to the IRS.
Okay. Okay.
Just waiting just a second for Ruben to come in.
Oh. Hello, Mandy.
Mandy, you're muted.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Hello, Mandy. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
How's it going? Sorry, you guys are over here. My camera's over here. So
Okay. So you have an entire television station over there, not just a computer. Mandy, and you are in the States?
No, I'm in Israel, Beersheba.
Ah, you're in Beersheba. Okay. Okay.
Yes. Where are you based?
I'm in Beersheba.
Ah,
Yeah,
name mode. Nice to meet you. Perhaps in person at some point.
Just one moment, guys. Rob, are you coming in? Come on in, we're waiting for you. Okay. Rob is logging in. We'll have two doctors today also. So we're in good hands.
Yeah, I'm already used to that. And Ruben is also in Beersheba, right?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
No.
No,
Ruben is.
Ruben.
Adrian Ruben is in London.
No,
Ruben
Adrian
Wolf
is in London,
Beersheba.
but the other Ruben, no, the other Ruben is in Beersheba.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
No.
Well, I tell you what, while we're waiting for Ruben to enter, Adrian asked when we could do, this is our session number 6. And Adrian asked if we could do a quick 2-3 minutes introduction, just basically state your case, why we're here, what are we doing? And I also thought to doing, which I failed to do it because I get calls sometimes on our recordings later on. So what happens when people listen to recordings, they want to come in next time, they don't know how. So I wanted to show to the screen our coordinates. In other words, this is our Zoom coordinates, 325-804-5811, password 285775. And we call our group either Torah for perplexed or perplexion for the unguided, to paraphrase Rambam in reverse, or whatever you want to call it. And we have no real rules, and we appreciate a diversity of views. We don't agree or disagree with other views. We just want to know what another person thinks. And we have so let me start just for the record. Today is an important day. Today is the year 5782, if I'm not mistaken. Today is Shivat 16. Important day. We just went to Tu B'Shvat yesterday. So happy past holiday, Tu B'Shvat, so to speak. Here's Ruben, okay, coming in. And we're doing these sessions. So we're doing, Ruben, we see your computer very well. Don't see your lovely face yet. You keep adjusting. Yeah. And so we're doing it every Tuesday at 2000 hours, military time, 8 o'clock in the afternoon. Beersheba time. In London, it's 6 o'clock?
6.
In the US, it's 1 o'clock, and the North Pole, I'm not sure. So we're covering the world, all over the place.
In the United States, it's 1 o'clock on the East Coast and 10 o'clock on the West Coast.
On the West Coast. So let me
Yes.
start, as Adrian asked, it's our session number 6. We call it, Zoom pad, whatever we call it. Let me tell you myself, like, why am I doing it? What's my interest? I thought about it within 2 minutes briefly to say, this is what I want. The reason I do it, because I want to know how do other people relate to other people and relate to God, the extent of their beliefs and why. I just want to understand their views. How do they pray? I'm interested in Jewish history. I'm interested in Jewish customs. I want to share the personal life stories if people so choose to share. And I want to make friends. Everybody on the screen I see, I already feel I have a close personal connections. I really enjoy everyone here. And that's the first reason. The second reason, I want to know how do people solve their, not only their problems, but when I have my own problems, and I sure have them, and I was always wonder, am I in a minority of problems? Do people are problemless? Or people have their own problems? And if they do, and if they get to know me, if I get to know them, maybe it'll help me to, how do I approach? How do I solve problems with the family, with the health, with the emotional, with physical, with confusions, with questions? And therefore, I'm here to basically share and listen and ask questions. So that's about me. So we'll go to whoever wants to introduce another 2-3 minutes next.
Well, I could do it.
Okay, Adrian.
All right. My name's Adrian Rubin. I'm a retired professor of medicine. I was born in the East End of London, very famous part of London. Grew up on a very famous street, actually, and came from a...
Which street is that?
It's called
Which
Brick
street?
Lane. And
Brick Lane?
Yes. It's very famous because a woman whose name I forget now wrote a book about Bangladeshi immigrants on Brick Lane. Brick Lane now is a very, very big Bangladeshi street. But when I was there, because the East End of London was really a melting pot, the people in that area were either Jewish or they were Irish or English, and then gradually came in all the immigrants to Britain. So my family, my home was kasher. My mother was from an Orthodox family, and my grandfather started the shop, and we lived above the shop selling records. He was a very, very frum man, and he was a cabinet maker, and he was making the cabinets that you put in the old wind-up gramophones. So somebody suggested to him, why don't you sell them? So he did that. And then if you're selling gramophones, you should sell records. And the records he could sell were Yiddish records because there was a big population. Anyway, after I was, before my bar mitzvah, my family moved to Northwest London. It's a very common migration. And I grew up there and went to school and went every week to the Beit Knesset, to the shul, Orthodox shul, where I had my bar mitzvah. Very famous rabbi was their head there. And then I went to medical school. And for one time, I thought I was going on Aliyah. And 75, I went to Israel with a Teudas Zehut, everything, but it didn't work out for silly reasons, not Israel's fault, my fault. So I came back, and then I started to do medical jobs in London. And then in 79, I got a scholarship, which was not difficult to get, to go to Yale University. And I went to America for 1 year. But there I met my future wife. She was not Jewish, but behind my back, she converted. Now, it was a conservative conversion, so not recognized by the rabbinate in Israel, nonetheless. And we had a very Jewish life at home. And I had 2 children there. And then after a while, we moved to Charleston in South Carolina. And then in 2011-12, I went on sabbatical to Hadassah. and my wife went with me. We spent 6 marvelous months in Jerusalem. But in 2015, she died of widespread cancer. So I was there for a little while, but I was contacted by a woman who I used to have a great fondness of when we were teenagers. And eventually we got together and decided that we really wanted to be together. And so I sold up everything, came back to London about nearly 4 years ago now, and that's it. Now, as far as Da'ut is concerned, I had a very, very strong grounding in Tanakh and in religion and everything. And for the many long while, I went to shul every week and I prayed, although when I think about it, I'm not sure that I actually thought that I was praying to anybody or to anything. But I also had a very strong grounding in Hebrew and history. When I went to Israel, of course, I started in not 75, but in my sabbatical, I started to speak Hebrew a whole lot more and became quite proficient in conversational Hebrew. As far as belief is concerned, I'm not somebody who prays. I don't have any benefit in prayer. I don't have any relationship with God, and it may be very startling for you to hear this, and I'm not really sure what I believe, but what I do believe is in the Jewish people, and I'm in love with my heritage, everything about it. And as I get less religious, although at home it's strictly kasher here because my wife likes to keep strictly kasher, and that's fine, and I'm happy with that. But as my belief in God and so on has got down, my belief in the Jewish people has got stronger and stronger. And so that's basically kind of my shtick. Now, why I joined this is because I go to the Talmud class with Jeff Green on a Wednesday evening in Beersheba by Zoom. And there I met Lev, and Lev and I got on very well, and we chat together. And he told me about this thing, and I will join anything that gives me a greater understanding and knowledge about my heritage. That's it.
So Edwin, really heritage Nick.
I'm a heritage Nick, and a friend of mine calls me an intellectual Jew. In other words, I love everything about the Jewish language, about Hebrew, about the history, about everything. I'm absolutely can't believe anti-Semitism. It makes no sense to me. So that's another part of my life. And Jewish contribution to civilization has been enormous. Medicine, science, art, music, theater, everything has been fantastic, and human values and ethics. And so that's what I like.
Amen. Well, let's jump from one doctor to another. How about now from Adrian Reuven to Reuven Wolf? Reuven, couple of minutes about yourself.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Reuven Wolf. I was born into a family of 5 children. My father was born near Minsk, but emigrated to the United States when he was about 5 or 6 years old. That time, the Tsar was taking kids when they're about 10, 11 years old, 12 years old into the army, and they disappear for 20, 30 years. So family made an attempt to come to the States. My mother's parents were from Ukraine. My grandmother from Horodek and my grandfather from Dinovitz. The name may have changed during the war, but they came in the 20s. So my parents were communists and met at a Communist Party cell meeting in New York City back in the 1930s. And I was brought up sort of a socialist environment. Most of my close relatives, a lot of them were socialists, so all their friends were socialists. But I had a religious awakening when I went to the University of Chicago. I had a religious experience when I was about 19, unexpectedly. And that put me on a trajectory of trying to figure out what this whole God thing was about. And started reading the Bible and began to see that rather than having a whole set of random cultural traditions, the whole Jewish experience was like a big wheel with spokes coming out. Each spoke was a different holiday, different observance, and at the center was God. So little by little, for a while, I got interested in Christianity, but eventually ended up, my wife especially, got me more interested in becoming Orthodox, and started becoming frum. And we ended up having 6 children, and along the way, I'd gone to medical school, and family, did a residency in pathology, but then switched to family medicine. After being in practice for some years, was approached by the chairman of a new department of family medicine at Northwestern University Medical School. So I started as a instructor, then assistant professor, and finally became an associate professor at Northwestern. And then there was a switch. My clinical practice, which was associated with Evanston Hospital, north of Chicago, switched its allegiance to the University of Chicago. So I became a clinical associate professor at the University of Chicago and did mostly practice, but some teaching over the years. Anyway, over the years, we ended up with 6 children, and now we have 19 grandchildren. Baruch Hashem. Around 2016, when the U.S. Supreme Court decided that gay marriage was a requirement for all the states as a constitutional right, I said to my wife, I had serious reservations about what's going to happen in the United States now, because the Jewish sages said that any country that recognizes, it's one thing for individuals to sin, homosexuality is considered a sin according to the Torah, but if a nation recognizes homosexual marriages, it loses its right to exist by God. And I've actually seen a tremendous disruption in the whole political life of America since then. And we start talking about moving to Israel. And it had been noise in the back of my mind. I learned some Hebrew over the years, but we started taking lessons on an online ulpan. And my wife really got into it in a big way and started making all the arrangements. And little by little, we arranged for the move, and we arrived here in November 2017. I had to go back after we sold our house for 3 months. Didn't want to give notice to my company until we had sold the house. But so I stayed back in Chicago with my daughter. One of my daughters lives in Chicago, her and her kids. Her husband, he's a grad student in molecular biology at the University of Chicago. He also happens to be a Rav. And so as of beginning of February, I moved here, took Ulpan, and I was able to get a job working for Terem, immediate care center in Beersheba, and heard about a job for the Air Force was looking for a doctor for a clinic in Chatzerim, which is near Beersheba. And I was able to get that. That was about 6-7 months, about a year after I moved here. And since beginning of 2018, I've been working 3 days a week at the Chatzerim Air Force Base, gradually learning Hebrew. Adrian's probably better at it than me. I have a knack for music, and I play piano and clarinet, but I've never had a knack for languages, and I'm still breaking my teeth on Hebrew. But I know enough of the medical terminology to manage at the clinic, and it's been challenging, but it's been very exciting. I think being in Israel is a lot more interesting than just retiring to kind of a succession of days where they all resemble each other. And I love being in Israel. Yeah.
All right. So now with the two Rubens, very interesting. With the two Rubens, let's see. We go to David in Beersheba, and then we'll start it from London, and we'll finish from London here. After that, we'll go on to Menachem Mendel. David, a couple of minutes for you guys. David.
Okay. So yeah, I was born, and then yeah, it happens. I don't know, it just happened. No, I was born in Beersheba. Born and raised.
An original.
I am a native and born and raised here. And basically, always had a love. I was born into a secular family, not very much into mitzvot and religion, all of that. Um, I was always interested in music, and especially electronic music. And I am involved in electronic music. I produce and I also DJ. And I also happened to fall in love with cinema. And so at the age of 21, I went on to film school and I graduated from film school. And for 12 years, I worked in television as a both as a freelancer, and sometimes I worked as a hired personnel in photography, in sound, in directing, producing, writing, and I also produced my own couple of documentary films. I was working on a feature film, which means a movie with actors, which I also wrote the script for. I was working on that project for 5 years, and I want to tell you guys, if you ever work on a film project, I just want to let you know that the hardest part is to get the money to do it. And so after 5 years of um, 5 years of attempts at financing the movie, it didn't work, and I realized it was not going to work. And I decided to, because of because of the nature of the project and all of that, I decided to shelve the project. And that was really the time when I sort of took a vacation from filmmaking and I went back to music. And that was in 2013. And since then, I'm involved only in music. And my interest in religion, my interest in Judaism started about 2 years ago in 2020, when I started listening to the videos and reading about the very famous Israeli religious scholar and philosopher Yeshayahu Leibowitz, and I consider him to be he's not a very popular character in many Jewish groups, but even his most, his biggest sort of enemies do actually accept the fact that he was a great man, a man of great knowledge and a great mind. And even though he challenged a lot of the orthodox thinking, and and
What's his name
so
again?
Yeshayahu Leibowitz.
Leibowitz.
Yeshayahu Leibovich in Hebrew. Yeshayahu Leibovich. And he died 27 years ago in 1994. He was 91 years old. He was actually also a medical doctor, but he was not practicing. He had, I think, 4 or 5 different doctorates, and he was teaching in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He was teaching neuro something neurophysiology and biochemistry, and he was researching the brain. He was a he was a pretty big scientist as well. And that's it. And that's how my interest in religion began. And I learned, I learned again how to put the tefillin, and I learned, basically from the bar mitzvahs, because I didn't do it. I learned everything by myself. I bought the siddur tefillah, and I learned. I went to the synagogue and I learned how to pray, and I started reading books, and here we are.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, David. And of course, passing the baton to Menachem Mendel. Go ahead, please.
Hi, yeah. It's fine. I guess a bit intimidating here. I've got these professors and these filmmakers. I'm just
I'm
like
not a
a
professor.
simple,
I'm not a professor.
yeah,
You're a filmmaker.
a filmmaker. Okay. Where do I start? I was born in Brighton, England. Made Aliyah about 8 years ago. My father is a Chabad rabbi. I was born being the only religious family for about a 2-hour drive. So I was brought up in a very secular community, being the only religious person there, or the only religious kid over there. I went to yeshiva. I went away from home to study at the age of 11, and then studied in London for 2 years, then went to Israel for a year when I was 14. Studied in Montreal for a year, in Manchester for 2 years, in Australia for a year, and in New Jersey for 2 years. So been around a little bit. Religion, I guess based on the backgrounds you guys are given, I think there's an assumption that when you see someone with a beard and they grew up in a religious family, that they all just took it all for granted. They were born into it, and that's that's all they know. Well, I wouldn't say it's definitely not with me. I wouldn't say that's really the experience. I'd say I probably started to take religion a little bit more seriously when I was about 14, and I read through Koheles. It got me thinking, like, what is the point in anything that's going on? There's really no point in anything. Anything you do is ultimately, eventually going to be forgotten. And so what's the point? And I thought to myself, well, if I'm in a yeshiva and if I'm in this environment, I may as well make the most of it, take advantage to find out as much as I can about what's actually in front of me, what people are trying to sell me. I mean, there's obviously a reason why my parents were so into what they were doing. And I started to research it in yeshiva. I wouldn't say I kept the general curriculum that they had over there. I very much learned through my own path of slowly covering ground and trying to broaden the knowledge and understand what's going on. And this is where I am today. So very excited and to learn from you and to hear and to discuss.
How do you earn your living?
I do digital marketing, build websites and ads and whatever else.
You have a family in Israel?
Yes, thank God. Yeah, a wife and 4 children. Have a sister who lives here in Tekoa. Have some cousins.
How many children?
4 children.
Oh, 4.
Thank God.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good, gentlemen. So we have a good introduction. It took us a little bit longer than 2 minutes each, Adrian requested, but it was good background.
Well, I didn't specify, but I think it's valuable to know.
It was.
You talk to someone like
it was 2 Jewish minutes.
Yeah. I talked to David and realized he only became religious a few years ago, a couple of years ago, and then there's Reuven who really changed his way of life in America and so on, and Menachem Mendel. Actually, I know Brighton very well. Menachem Mendel, came the traditional route from a very, very Orthodox family. So it's very interesting. I get.
I just
I'm
want to
always
point out
surprised
that
people who have changed their whole ways of life, because when you meet them, you don't know that background.
David,
yeah,
what did you say?
I just wanted to point out that I am not fully religious. I'm still not there, and I still don't feel that I'm ready for being fully religious. So
I tell you, I tell you what, as we if we're going to our Tuesday meetings, Mizrach Hashem will continue doing this. I think we'll cover a little subject, because I don't personally just add 2 minutes here, and then I'll pass it on to whoever next takes it from there. I don't know what it means to be religious. To me, it's I don't know what does it mean to be religious. Is that the person who goes to a synagogue or doesn't go to synagogue? I've seen a lot of religious people without kippahs and very non-religious kippahs with a beard down to their knees and a payas around the neck. So to me, it's very, very kind of amorphous type of thing. But I want to go, now that we've done introductions, we're ready to get, and if we don't finish it today, we're going to continue next Tuesday at 8 o'clock. But basically, the subject of prayer. Adrian and I had the discussion started, I guess, not Adrian and several of us started before. And I briefly mentioned to you, like to point to Adrian's, I relate to what each one of you said, what Adrian says about prayers. I started, of course, completely not religious person, quote unquote, born in Russia. You would imagine what Russian Jews are. Came to America, America, and slowly started to become more observant, I guess, if you will. And as I went to the synagogue, I never can understand how can I in 45 minutes, Shachrit, become kavanah and closeness with God. With my poor Hebrew, even poor English at that time, I didn't know how can I make my Shachrit prayers in 10 hours. I can't even read the words. Eventually, when I got a little bit better, I started to say, wait a minute, now that I read the words, but why should I? Because it's just going through a thing. So I said, maybe I just go to the synagogue, don't even worry about my prayer, will close my eyes, get unity with God, have some internal relation, pour out my heart to God, tell him my problems, tell him good things, and God will take care of me. And then I said, wait a minute, but if I do that, I might as well pray at home. I don't need to go to synagogue. I don't need anybody else around me. I can just pray my own prayers. So I did go through, and even today, sometimes I get up in the morning, go to synagogue. Sometimes I'm at home. Sometimes I pray for 10 minutes and very deep in concentration coming out. Sometimes I pray from a book. And when I finish, sometimes I ask myself, well, did I really feel connection with God? I don't know. I just read words. So I have the same kind of, what is it prayer? What does it mean to me? What does it mean to other people? So pass it. Who wants to pick it up from there? We have about 8 minutes, and we'll continue, of course, next time. But any comments on this? It's a wonderful topic. Please.
Well, let me tell you one thing very briefly. I don't want to use the time, but when we went back to America in November to see my children and so on in Charleston in South Carolina. And I went back to the conservative synagogue that I was a member of, but we also used to go to a new Orthodox synagogue. And I sat down and spoke to this man that I knew very well, who was a previous professor of divinity in a college in New Jersey, and a strange chap, but he keeps kasher completely. In fact, when he came home from college as a young man and his parents were away, he threw out all the dishes and all the pots and pans and bought new because they weren't kasher enough for him. But he tells me that he is in love with God. It's a love affair from his perspective, number one. Number two, Lev tells me that sometimes he has a chair next to him and he imagines God is sitting there and he's telling him his thoughts, his ideas, his troubles, all that stuff. I have to say that is something that I cannot grasp. It has no meaning for me. This idea of connecting with God is something, I'm not opposed to it. And people who do it, as long as they don't interfere with other people, I'm happy with that. But it's a concept that I cannot grasp.
Okay.
I used to say prayers and I used to say all the words. And I remember in the shul, I was trying to say every single word and I was always behind everybody else. So I knew they were cheating because I was pretty good at reading them, that sort of thing. But that's my whole thing. It doesn't make me any less of a Jew. In fact, I'm more of a Jew now than I ever was. Well, and thank God my wife wants to be kasher, so I'm happy with that.
Well, let's on that note, let's pass it from one Brit to another. Menachem Mendel, what do you say?
I think we'd first have to define what is God in order to know what we're even praying to. Is God sitting on a chair next to us, or I don't know. How do you perceive God? What's your understanding of what God is?
What is yours?
I asked first.
Doesn't mean anything.
I thought you had the answer.
Well, Reuven, what do you think?
Well, I have
on my screen, you're almost between Adrian and Menachem Mendel. So
yeah, it's
okay.
I would say when I first had this experience, sort of mystical experience, I experienced almost like prophecy, being given words to say to this lady who was going through a very hard time, but it was very, very strong, to the point when you have an experience that strong, you just don't know what God will do. Does he intervene all the time, or does he just hide all the time, or how much does he get involved? I've gone through periods of, initially I felt like God was there all the time and I was praying, getting answers. And more in the last 10, 20 years, it's been more like gone from a triumphant relationship to a more ironic one, where I still know he's there, but it's a complicated, difficult relationship. He hides a lot. It's very hard to feel connection. I sometimes wonder if being able to pray easily, I like the kind of prayer that Reb Nachman talked about, individual prayer. I sometimes find the routine prayers lately become more boring. Almost I'll do them, but they don't have the same involvement. I've been trying to do more of a meditative type experience. I sometimes wonder, talking to God and being intimate with him is almost like a gift, like being able to speak a language easily versus struggling with it. But sometimes struggling with it is also part of the process. But it's I remember somebody once describing the experience of American blacks, that whites in America had a triumphant view of history, whereas blacks had an ironic view of history. And so lately, my experience of God has become more ironic, but it doesn't mean I've stopped believing. It's almost like I can't believe. I mean, in a way, it's, I feel in a way like God held a mountain over my head and, said, believe or else. Not really, but it's, when you have an experience that strong, you can't deny the existence of God. It's just that struggling through it and coming to some sort of, I'm looking for a kind of a relationship where I can feel his presence, but at the same time, I realize that to have our free will, we can't have this constant feeling of God's watching over your shoulder. Maybe somebody like Moshe on his level, he can handle that kind of constant feeling of God's presence without it overwhelming him or making him feel nullified. It's just like I said, it's difficult. It's a constant struggle for me, but at the same time, my belief in God is like my belief in the sun coming up.
It's interesting that we started to define. Menachem Mendel saw the question, well, let's define it, and we just started to define it. Relating personal experience. We have about a minute and a half. David, only 30 seconds, because I want to take the last minute come to finish for the next time. David, what do you add?
Well, I actually find it very difficult to even start, because me and Lev, we have talked about it. The only thing I will say now, and I'll just leave it to next week if it's finished. What I will say is this: praying, just like Yeshayahu Leibovich said, if you have a difficulty to pray, just imagine that you have to say that what you're saying is like you're reading an algorithm, or like you're reading a textbook. I know it sounds strange what I'm saying now, because I don't think I have the time to explain.
There's 2 seconds.
Go ahead.
Is this call up? Is this call up over, or can we start it again until the end of the hour? Can we just restart the call?
We will. Okay, now we'll take it from here. If we only have 30 seconds, we purposely do it, not because it's a free Zoomer, 40 minutes, because I found from experience, from my own teaching experience, more time, we 10 hours wouldn't be enough. But when we have 40 minutes, it puts us into a system. We have to keep honing our skills. So that's 40 minutes. So next time will be,
it's like seeing a psychiatrist or psychologist, 45 minutes.
That's right. Gentlemen, we have 10 seconds.
Sorry, David, for interrupting you.
Next Tuesday at 8 o'clock. In the meantime, Shavua Tov, Shabbat Shalom. Love you. Very good.
Okay.
Shalom.